I first want to say thank you very much for this humbling opportunity to share the same platform with Dr. Emmanuel Akwete. And as if by coincidence, just on Monday, I was the facilitator for the Chief Justices Forum, a gathering of judges and lawyers and a few civil society organizations and politicians. And the presentation I made at that forum, when I got the invitation to be here, I tried to mirror it in such a way that it can be used for both purposes. Because the theme for that occasion was the judiciary and election 2016. And my presentation focused on how the judiciary can play its role to avoid or minimize disputes that rise into violence that then lead us to nowhere. They only lead us to loss of limbs. They lead us to flight of families. They lead us to hunger. They lead us to insurrection and military takeovers. Obviously, elections are not designed to be for that purpose, but we find ourselves in this part of the continent where violence is a feature of elections. I'll talk about the paradox that Dr. Akwete spoke about, but obviously that's a part of the paradox. Now, he had also given me a small assignment, and I'll see if I can do that in 3 minutes by giving you a summary of the Electoral Commission and its responsibility. Basically, the Constitution of Ghana 1992 established the Electoral Commission. It's a commission that is made up of 7 commissioners. You have the chair. Too often in Ghana, we seem to have forgotten about everybody else and focus on the chair and pay so much attention on the chair that we accuse the chair of being biased one way or the other, and that the chair has the capacity to manipulate the process in favor of one party. That chair does not take decisions alone. Charlotte Osei does it in conjunction with 6 other equally competent persons. Well, so it is an independent constitutional body. By the architecture of our constitution, when we say an independent constitutional body, it takes the character of SHRAJ. It takes the character of NCCE. They are not supposed to be under the beck and call or control of any other entity, not even the executive. So they have the independence to act and to exercise their intellect without thinking that they may lose their jobs. Well, unfortunately, we all know that to be able to exercise that kind of capacity really depends on the individual, because there are people, even judges, who know that after they have been appointed to become judges, even though the appointment process, the executive may be involved, after the appointment, the executive completely has no power to deal with them, as in dismissing you or suspending you or anything of the sort. And yet we have men and women of very timorous souls who still have to play to the executive, or certain individuals have to try and do them favors that are uncalled for. That's why, especially in America, when they are appointing the judges of the Supreme Court, the presidents know that once I have appointed you, I'm not assured that you do anything for me, and I can't touch you, I can't do anything to you. So you appoint the person, and right after that, he must have been your best of friends. But the next day you could bring a case and he will throw you out. and say things that you may not be happy about. I think that is what we ought to have, and I'm sure we have quite a good number of that, except that we have to up our game a bit more. So it is assigned two major responsibilities, except that one often comes to play too much, and that has to do with the organization of elections. Because every 4 years that has to happen, we often only remember the EC for that job. But the Constitution also provides and gives them the power or the job to assist in demarcation of electoral boundaries. Of course, that must go through a parliamentary process, but that is also their job. Now, typically, as we know them, the EC's job will include making the preparations for the elections. And all of these are guided by law. So, to start with this year, they needed the CI 91. The CI 91 is the law that empowers the EC to register people so that they will be given the right to be able to vote. As we all know by now, the Constitution provides that every citizen, number one, who is 18 years and above, and who is of sound mind, is qualified to be a register. So it's not every citizen who can vote. It's a qualified citizen. And the qualifications are that you are 18 and above, and that you are of sound mind. Unfortunately, however, we don't have a process you have to go through to determine whether you are sound or of sound mind or not. That also will bring me to the question of minors that Dr. Akwete speaks about. It's a very major concern, and Dr. Farijan himself had noted that the parties, particularly the NDC and the NPP, shamelessly continue to mobilize, toddlers, excuse me to say, to put them on the voters' roll and use them to vote. That's the extreme we can get. That's very worrying. Right, so they promulgated CI 91 to give them the opportunity to be able to register people, and then after that there's the exhibition process of the voters register, and then you're able to go check your name and confirm that you are really there. Of course, that law also provides for and enables the EC to be able to have people challenge you if you are not qualified, and also to go through a process of having your name deleted if you are not qualified and you presented yourself, or you are a foreigner and you presented yourself. There is a whole committee that is set up under the CI 91 for these processes. In fact, voting as a minor is an offense. It is punishable. Registering as a minor is an offense. Registering as a foreigner is an offense also, and they are all punishable. And indeed, registering more than once or attempting to do more than once is also an offense. And all of them are punishable, and the law provides for them in the CI 91. The general position of the law's punishment is that when you are found guilty of any of those, you have the potential of being fined by a court, and the fine is about 600 or so. And if you don't get that, or you could get that and get a prison term of up to 2 years. Now, in addition to that, you will stand banned from being registered to vote ever for 5 years, not ever, for 5 years. And so you will not be able to register, and you will not be able to vote for 5 years. There's a bit of some observation that Dr. Akwete made that I will also chip in an aspect of that. Then moving on from that point and compiling the register. You need a register before you can have an election. So after compiling the register, they need to have a law that dictates how the elections ought to be conducted. So the EC, as we speak, has the CI 94. The CI 94 provides for how the voting process will go, how the presiding officers, the EC herself, the chairperson is the presiding officer for the presidential elections. There are presiding officers that are spread across the country for the purposes of the parliamentary elections. At every district, they have officers who are there. Most of them, as you know, are often recruited just to assist the EC because they are not permanent staff. The EC can't afford to employ all of those people and keep them on its payroll for all the years. So that's what happens. Now, the unfortunate thing, though, is that whilst the law provides very clearly for specific timelines within which the registrations ought to happen, exhibition ought to happen, the voters' roll ought to be available, it does appear we are unable to stick to those timelines. And the Electoral Commission will tell you, will give you an excuse that it had been bogged down by too many legal, battles this year, and that's why it was unable to stick to the provisions calendar, as it were. Now, this is where it has pushed us to 40 days to elections, and it is today we understand the EC is making available the register. Now, when the election petition went to court dealt with in 2013, the court, after hearing the matter, gave recommendations, and the recommendations included that the register ought to be made available to the parties in sufficient time, and that a supplementary also should be made available as well. Now, 40 days to elections. Okay. If they went through the register today and they had problems, and these problems ought to be sorted out in a manner that cannot be sorted out with the EC, that tells us that potentially 7th December is drifting into deeper danger. Already there's danger because of the mass disqualification of the presidential hopefuls, and all 12 of them. Of course, Ikeadonko says it is God's doing, so she's not part. We know that at least, minus her, everybody will sue. So far, 4 have sued, and don't be, as it were, confused or amused about what happened today to Nana Konadu Agyeman-Rawlings' suit. That was just a preliminary legal objection to the procedure. It has absolutely nothing to do with the merits of the case. So, as I got some information, they are refiling the same afternoon, because the court says you have come for judicial review and you have come for enforcement of fundamental human rights at the same time. You can't do both at the same time. You either do one at one point. So they say, okay, thank you very much. We'll go. We'll delete the portions which are fundamental human rights and bring it as what? Judicial review. Or we'll go and delete the portions which are judicial review and bring it as what? Fundamental human rights. So time is still running. Now, I was talking about the register, and I have to be careful because I may not be able to make my own comments on the presentation. Now, imagine, even today, the Supreme Court also gave a judgment compelling the Electoral Commission to ensure that the collation sheets are signed by the agents of the parties and that they are made available to them as well, because CI 94 did not make provision for that. And somebody went to court, and today the Supreme Court said, no, do this correction. Now, if anybody had problems with the register at this point that they are just receiving, and they went to the court, you can imagine the problem we have at hand. But I am very much assured, because of what the Chief Justice has done, designating 17 courts, 6 only in Accra only, and taxing them to sit from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. The courts normally would have knocked off by 12. 1 o'clock would have finished court business and be running to our various chambers. But now they are sitting from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So that will also help. They are sitting on weekends as well. In fact, they would have been asked to sit on holidays as well, except that after the election petition, Bernard Mona of the PNC went to the court and challenged a portion of CI 74. CI 74 is the rules that are used for presidential election petitions. He went to challenge it and said that document gave the Chief Justice the power to let the court sit on a holiday. He thinks that the Chief Justice should not be giving that power except the President. Well, the Supreme Court agreed with him. I'm only praying that his party will not be in trouble on a day that it is only a holiday that the court can save him. Yes, so I say we ought to be careful about the motivations for what we do. Because you may be motivated by something today, and you ought to think about beyond today, what will it be? Right now, his party's candidate is off the ballot paper. If it had to take a holiday to get his party candidate fixed, it will not happen because he did that. Now, so it's okay, we can leave that there. But the point that I needed to make is that we are so late in the day that if the court said provide the register in good time, if the rules you have set for yourself give you, suggest to you that you need to make the electoral roll so early, and yet we are 40 days and that is when we are making it ready, I think we are in trouble. In fact, I don't know what would have happened if Parliament had sanctioned the November date for elections. If Parliament has sanctioned November, then I have no idea. November would not have happened. Okay. Now, the CI 94 then tells you the officers of the EC, the powers that they have when they are doing the election processes on balloting on election day. If you go there and you are rowdy and you are misbehaving, they have the right to, for example, call the police officers, security officers there to take you away. But that is not supposed to be used in a manner that denies the person their right to vote. It is only to be used sparingly and in a situation where you want to prevent chaos. So it doesn't mean you have been giving a license as an EC officer to just drive people away and perhaps allow yourself to be used by a political party to look at people in their faces and say, you are NDC, get out of the queue. You are misbehaving. No, it doesn't work that way. So I believe that's all about it. And then at the end of the day, when we have voted, they will put everything together and then they will announce to us that this is the person who has won the elections for president and for parliament. So I hope I've done the duty you gave me well, somehow. Now, I would move to, and I'm timing myself to see if I can do that within 5 minutes. Which means 4:45. I should be putting the microphone down. Now, Dr. Akwete raised a number of issues. He spoke about the right to vote. I just told you about the right to vote, that obviously it's not available to every citizen. It's available to qualified citizens. He spoke about the fact that that's from the very beginning of his introduction, that elections are supposed to be opportunity for the citizens to make a choice of selecting the leaders and mandating them. You mandate them to do what? To do your wishes and your will. As we know by now, they are all going around spreading manifestos, and beyond the manifestos, it's becoming the common thing now to say one district, one that. Nana Addo was saying one district, one that. He was getting faulted by the governing party. Now we've heard the president also say one district, one something. Even today we are hearing one district, how many tractors? 10 tractors or so. Yes. So it's a new thing, So whilst that is the purpose of election, don't we find rather strangely that the mandate that we give to the politicians, they don't seem to respect the mandate soon after the elections are over? Because after the elections are over, your view does not count that much, if at all. Your point of view does not count that much, if at all. And I think that is an issue we need to examine, because if we have the right to give you the mandate and to ask you to do things, then you ought to do them in a way that should satisfy us. But some will say, well, you voted on the basis of my manifesto, so I deliver my manifesto. You can't dictate me, for me after that. Then, Doc spoke about long periods of campaign and who is financing the parties. In fact, his organization has been very concerned about the campaign periods. What I'm looking forward to is for us all to be able to buy into what IDEC has been talking about for a long time, because it doesn't work that way, that we finish inaugurating a new president on the 7th of January and the political season, campaign season, begins the next day. It's absolutely wrong. In fact, on the day a new president is being inaugurated, the campaign begins for the next, election period. That is completely wrong and ought to be checked. In America last year, the longest campaign they had was less than 190 days. And people were complaining. Civil society complained. And they said that was the longest campaign they had. I'm talking about the last elections in America. It was less than 90 days. 90 days. Why do we do that to ourselves? We begin the campaign and insulting everybody else. And the campaign language, he spoke about that one too. It's so terrible. Very, very terrible. It's abuse. It is about how you are capable of proving superior in the area of using abusive language against your opponent. It's not the way to develop. So I'll say, beyond the transition bill and beyond the laws that we pass to regulate elections, we should also look at how we can regulate campaign seasons, like what you have in the United States, where it is not campaign every day. After the elections, we should all put ourselves together and to focus on one agenda: development of the country. I hope you agree with that. Okay. Do you agree with that? Okay. Right. Now, Doc also spoke about who is financing these campaigns for all of that long stretch. The laws are very clear. We are not supposed to take financing from outside of the country or from sources other than indigenous sources. But that goes on. Nobody questions them. Again, he spoke about the monetization of the elections. The elections obviously have become for who can pay. And as we know now, even the campaigns that are going on, votes are literally being bought. And the institution, okay, the time I gave myself is up. And the institution, I am talking about the Ghana Integrity Initiative, has launched a report. And in the report, it clearly cites the governing party of too much incumbency abuse. It releases this report every election year. And every election year is against the governing party for that election year, that they are abusing incumbency. They are using state resources to do their political party campaign. And yet nothing changes. They said that in Kufuor's time, it didn't change. Kufuor still went about campaigning with our resources. You don't need to be told that the governing party campaigns with your resources. It is so obvious. And sometimes the way the monies are stashed through various entities, including recently what we came to, appreciate to be those whatever modules of processes for youth, whatever, all money being stolen, put through some entity in the name of using them for laptops for people, for young people, for training for young people, and all that money was our money and was really meant for campaign. So that by the end of the campaign, we got to know that the presidency alone had overspent its budget by over how much? 100%, isn't it? That was too much. Okay. The laws are there. We are not enforcing them. Monetization, vote buying going on. The laws are really clear, and Prof refers to treating. Now, the law on treating, according to the election laws, according to the representation of the people's law, is simple. That if I bought you a drink, mere drink, Coke, Fanta, and I bought it for you because it was intended to influence you to vote for me, it is wrong. It is treating. And it's an offense that is punishable under the law. That offense punishment includes you being, losing your right to vote for 5 years. But it goes on. If you are giving money, and the money you are giving is intended to influence the person's direction to vote. If you are giving money, and it's intended to stop somebody from voting for the other person, all of that is treating. And the law says, it's punishable. Unfortunately, we are not enforcing these laws. Prof referred rightly to the law that requires that 2/3 the party should have active presence by way of offices and so on in 2/3 of the districts. It's not being enforced. When the minor parties tried to live up to it, they only did it when they were supposed to present their budgets. They audited accounts. They did. The major parties did not do, and they went without any punishment. I will end on the note of what I referred to earlier about the shameless, recruitment of minors to register for elections. And that continues to happen. And when you say, for example, in this year, that in 2012 minors registered, and that in 2016 they may have grown into adults, and so that ought to be allowed. That is obviously wrong. At the time they did that, they broke the law. When you break the law and it's a criminal offense, there is no expiry to criminal offense. They ought to suffer the consequences. In any case, if those people had been prosecuted, they would have been banned from voting for the next 5 years. So 2012 to 2016, is it 5 years yet? It is not. So those people cannot be entitled to be allowed to vote. The more we allow that kind of atmosphere, the more we encourage and acquiesce for the wrong things to continue to happen. What happened to continuous registration of voters? And Prof, in that reference, I say, and we all know that the solution is in continuous registration of voters. In any case, the ID system, I'll quote what the Chief Justice had to say in the first Abu Ramadan and Evans Nimako case against the Electoral Commission, in which the court said that the NHIS card was faulty and could not be used as an identity card for registration purposes. The Chief Justice said, and that is what she said, she gave the lead judgment, and she concluded by saying that the need for a credible and reliable multi-purpose national identification system comprising the relevant data and communication infrastructure that would answer to most of our national needs, whether for electoral planning or development or other purposes, is greater than ever before. We think the time has come for appropriate authorities to respond to this. And this was said as far back as 2014. We have not done anything. Everybody has gone to sleep because the politicians have an advantage to get from having the register done in the manner it is being done now. Continuous registration is provided for by the law. CI 91 provides for it, but we don't do it. The previous CIs, which CI 91 came to replace, provided. We are not doing anything about it. It is the surest way to avoid some of the problems that we have seen, and these problems manifest themselves in disputes, electoral disputes. Then some of them go beyond to explode into electoral violence, and the electoral violence is what the paradox that Prof speaks about. We end up saying we have a peaceful election, but when it's election time, we all sit on tenterhooks, and people who can afford, and including the politicians especially, take their children, their families out of this country because they are afraid anything could happen. That is not the way to treat the citizens. Don't treat us in a way that we are gripped by fear when it is an election time. An election in which we are voting for a member of parliament for his own personal, private enrichment. Because for most of them, that is the purpose anyway. For most of them, that's the purpose, to get an ex gratia of so much after only 4 years, when a civil servant who has done 40 years in the service gets not up to 10% of what they are taking home. I think that for as long as we don't enforce the laws, and for as long as we don't assure equality in the way we treat some of these matters, we will continue to have elections that are dogged by fear. Fear that is often very palpable, and fear that hangs in a cloud that you can literally touch. We need to move on from this point. Thank you.